It was the best and worst thing that ever happened to me because I ultimately had a near-death experience that sort of rebooted my nervous system. And when my recovery was ongoing for 2 years, it took a long time of going to different doctors. I had seizures and went to ERs and people misdiagnosing me with autoimmunes and lots of things. But these memories started coming to the surface.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Human OS, the podcast where we upgrade your internal operating system. I'm your host, Story, and today we have a very special guest, TIHANE. TIHANE is an artist, musician, creative director, and storyteller whose work sits at the intersection of music, healing, embodiment, and authentic self-expression. Beyond her work as an artist, TIHANE also helps creatives break through resistance and come back to their authentic truth through her work with neuroscience, somatic therapy, and flow psychology. And because so much of the Human OS is about how we return to ourselves through the body, through creativity, through truth, I'm really excited to have this conversation and welcome TIHANE. I met TIHANE on a whim, and she reached out to me on Instagram, and it just felt like kindred spirits.
Yeah.
And so though we don't know each other very well, I feel we know each other very well. And I had to have her on this podcast. So TIHANE, why don't you start with whatever you'd like to share of your story?
Yeah. So I will say that my story started in one of the probably most crazy childhoods that you can have. And I like to always say that because I think a lot of times when we look at people who are talking about resilience or living a life of wellness or whatever it is, oftentimes we either feel like people have come from more sort of easy, simple circumstances. And a lot of times those people have actually gone through some of the craziest lives, but you don't get to hear that backstory as much. And it's beautiful. It's because a lot of us manage to make it so far through that backstory that we're not constantly wearing it like a chip on our shoulder, like a badge of honor. But I like to start there because when I was in my healing journey, I remember going to a lot of events and summits and workshops trying to find people that I could relate to. And I felt like I wasn't meeting a lot of people who I felt like started at like negative 100, where it was like the crazy inherited trauma and like just things happening around you and just all of these seemingly insurmountable circumstances. So that being said, I did come from amazing people, but everybody was emotionally very young. I say like my parents and I grew up together. There were parents and step parents and second sets of step parents and lots of things going on with alcoholism or addiction or emotional, psychological, verbal abuse. I also overcame sexual abuse and didn't know about it until I was in my 20s. I had a condition called dissociative amnesia. So you just block out what your brain cognitively can't compute. And I didn't know that, but I did know there was a lot of things that had gone on. So addiction, eating disorders, like all the things that one could have. I feel like I traveled through them. But the reason why I like to talk about that story is because I am so grateful to be someone who walks around in so much joy all the time now. So instead of taking you through all the crazy little avenues of my life, I just like to say it was wild. It has been an insane adventure. But my favorite parts of my story is that I'm Polynesian and Croatian. And having this mixture of cultures was beautiful and also challenging for a few reasons that I feel like contributed to part of what I do now and what I do with other people. Coming from indigenous and immigrant roots in growing up in America, I grew up between Hawaii and California, was a very displacing experience. I felt like my identity was everywhere and nowhere. And I now love to work with people who feel like your entire life you've just felt a little bit different, that you don't quite fit in any one place. You're maybe too much of this culture and not of enough of this culture, or too much of this gender and not enough of this gender. And you're kind of always trying to. So I think the most important part of my journey is to say that I grew up thinking I would always just be an actress. That was my big dream. I wanted to go to NYU Tisch. I got in. I was like, it's happening. And I got there and I just had a really surprising, just mind-blowing different time when I was there. I didn't want to be there, I had all of this childhood trauma that resurfaced, and I spent many years after that deciding that I actually wanted to be a musician because music helped me save my life. And I went through all the things, the opportunities with the major label deals and tours and all these things, but I felt like there's more for me here. I don't know what it is, but I still, again, I just don't fit. I don't just fit in the music world. I don't just fit in this world. And I had to create a world. So that's my favorite part of my story is I ended up living for 10 years in Kenya, and I ended up there by fate, by destiny, but it was an incredible place to firstly grow up emotionally and spiritually. I needed to like come into my center. And then I also became a creative director and produced events, and I worked with musicians and people in fashion and film, and ultimately turned into a mixed media artist over those years, but not just an artist who really believes in the power of using art to heal ourselves and to come back into connection with each other. So now here in London, I am doing everything from seemingly normal music gigs to the mixed media performance that you just saw to leading workshops and retreats where there's music and dance and embodiment and breath work using all of those modalities for people to actually discover more about themselves and heal themselves. So I work in all of those spaces, but ultimately it's because I came from being mixed culture, mixed media, and just this mixture of influences. And my favorite part of my story overall is that I've gotten to really claim that through all these things, I just say I'm a storyteller, and I get to meet other beings who I feel like really also have allowed that to be the core of you, you know? So that's my backstory in a few moments.
Wow, I love that so much, and I relate to so many things you're saying. I have so many questions that I wish I had a paper to write them all down because now I'm like, I don't know which one to start with. When you had this memory loss,
Yeah.
how did you get that memory back? And if someone is experiencing something like that, if they're experiencing this memory loss, did you feel like that memory loss was affecting the underlying subconscious actions in your life? Because a lot of people would argue, well, if I don't remember this painful scenario, why would I want to remember it now if it's not affecting my life? And and my hypothesis is that it is affecting your life, but you would be the person to actually be able to answer that question.
I love this question. I really understand now that our body and our consciousness remembers everything. So anything that we think we've forgotten is just something that we're not aware of, but it doesn't mean we've actually forgotten it. And anybody who will share, yeah, there's years of my life I just can't remember, or I've never been able to remember that part of my childhood, or whatever it is, even if we want to argue that it's not affecting us, intuitively underneath it, we just know that it is. We just know, we just know that there are things about ourselves that we need to be aware of in order to process them. The balancing point to that, though, that I will say, which is really amazing, is in the process of uncovering a lot of memories, and I'll say in a second how that all came to be, I did feel like I went into a certain stage where I was very neurotically trying to remember everything, every detail, everything that I wanted to try to regain everything. And I was working with an incredible practitioner who worked in the body. And she said, you have to trust that you don't need to open every single box, like every single memory, but that your body, your consciousness will deliver to you the ones that hold, trauma or moments that have been frozen in your nervous system that you need to process. And just by processing one moment, you might process 5 other memories that you don't ever gain conscious access to, but your body system has now processed that. So that's the balance. I think we do need to remember things, but we don't have to become so vigilant about trying to remember every single detail. How that happened for me is a process that I would not necessarily recommend to anybody, but I am going to share how I would recommend people presencing memories. So because I had a lot of trauma, I was also really drawn naturally to drugs and substances because it was my way of trying to process, to create connection in a body that felt like I couldn't safely create connection without having different substances. And I was experimenting with psilocybin, which to me is also not just like a recreational drug. There's a lot of incredible psilocybin assisted properly medically, informed trials that people are now doing with research and trauma, which are amazing. I was not doing that. I was researching with myself. And I didn't know it, but I had had a chronic mold exposure the year before. It was a toxic chronic mold exposure, very, very terrible in my ears, nose, throat, sort of brain canals, because I had been chain smoking in front of a fireplace in a wet apartment and inhaling black mold. So when I was experimenting with psilocybin at higher and higher doses, I ultimately had this neurological short circuit that happened when I had overwhelmed the mold in my system with the fungus of the mold from the mushrooms. And it was the best and worst thing that ever happened to me, because I ultimately had a near-death experience that sort of rebooted my nervous system. And when my recovery was ongoing for 2 years. It took a long time of going to different doctors. I had seizures and went to ERs, and people misdiagnosing me with autoimmunes and lots of things. But these memories started coming to the surface. They were coming in dreams. They were coming in different flashes and PTSD experiences. And so even though it was a very intense way to regain that information, regaining the information changed my life. And when we talk a little bit more about gentler ways that I think people can move into this, I'll share some ways that I think people can do that without any of that sort of surreal sci-fi version of going about it.
Yeah, like losing their entire brain. Sorry. Okay. Okay, cool. My next question was, I'm definitely a person who has felt like everywhere is home and nowhere is home.
Yeah.
That I fit in everywhere and also nowhere.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to tell me, how do you create community in that way, especially with a more nomadic lifestyle? How do you find grounding? And what are the positives and maybe negatives of that way of being?
Yeah. I think for anybody who feels that way, and if anybody is listening, because you've always felt that way, like even as a kid in the sandbox, and then when you had your first relationship, and then you had your first best friend or whatever it is, you always feel this everywhere and nowhere. I'm at home in all these places and also nowhere. I think the number one thing is to embrace that you have, whether you believe that your spirit chose this journey or it's just random, you have ended up in a position where you are going to get to go on the interior journey of being a human that very few people get to go on. Like, most people are actually going to feel so at home or just so distracted in the external world for the rest of their lives that they will not know themselves at the depth of the level that you are invited to get to know yourself. And even though in our younger years, this can feel really challenging, when you sit with elderly people or people that are maybe sick and their passing is imminent, the ones who have met themselves the most deeply do not have fear. So the first thing I would say is, if you're that kind of person, it's like, embrace, whether you want to call it the blessing and the curse or the silver lining or whatever it is, but like, embrace the gift of that, because that is something that so many people will spend their whole lives not even knowing that they're missing, but they will feel the missing of that. So step one, I think, is like embracing that that's your path. And then number two, I would say, is to find your ways of embracing that path. And it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. For me, like I said, music, sound, resonance changed my life. Like, when I really started to understand that listening to music was not just a nice experience, like, music was always a place I could go. And music was always where I felt like home. And then learning how to create music and create music with other people was not just because I wanted to be a musician. It was because I felt, oh, how can I journey into my interior and then share that interior in the exterior world in a way that's authentic, instead of feeling like I'm doing it in just like a fake social way. So I think the second step is really, whether you love visual art or you love hiking or you love, it's like, where do you feel like you can be in your interior really authentically, and then also connect that with other people? That's going to change your life. Sometimes people just love yoga or breath work or knitting, painting, wine classes, whatever it is. Like, it just makes such a big difference. And then the last thing I think is that, if you feel really inspired by the journey, you will probably find at the core of it that you have a story to tell too. Because I think that a lot of beings like us are almost designed a little bit different for a reason. And usually I find that that reason is because we become so in love with stories, like our own story, inspiring other people to tell their stories. And that part is the part that I think fulfills us the most. And so even though sometimes in a room full of people, you might feel like I'm here, but also I'm a little bit not here because I'm just a little bit different. If you add those steps 2 and 3, where you're sharing creatively or in some authentic way when you're with those people, and you also feel like you're sharing your own story and you're inspiring other people to share their stories, you will feel like there is a home for you on earth, even if you also feel like your home is maybe a little bit more inexplicable and intangible than that.
Um, you're so articulate.
Thank you.
Um, I feel like, normally at the end of my show, I ask people to give some tips for people, and you've just listed tip after tip after tip already. I consider myself a storyteller as well. And storytelling has been such a huge proponent of my life. I mean, my name is Story, for
Yeah,
God's sake.
exactly. I was like, I think I consider you a storyteller too.
But I would say that at the beginning of my journey, telling my story was definitely almost like a purge.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was carrying this big boulder, and every time I told my story, a little pebble of that boulder would like come off. And so it was cathartic. I would just do it over and over again. But not everybody earned that story. And so, how do we make sure that when people are telling stories, they do tell it in a safe space, in a safe way? How do they know when to tell it, how to tell it, how much to tell, um, especially if they've never done it before?
Yeah. Yeah. There is such an art and a science to sharing our stories, I feel. Also because, you know, it can be a really tricky thing when you're sort of retelling a story. Sometimes you can also release, but you can kind of re-traumatize yourself sometimes too if you, like you're saying, end up telling those stories in spaces that aren't necessarily safe or conducive. I think a few things. Number one, I think actually the tip I was gonna say at the end of the episode, but I'll give a version of it now, is telling your story out loud to yourself a lot of times in the beginning is actually really amazing. So, like, if you turn on a voice recorder, or you use your phone to just like vlog or whatever, and if you just let yourself do the purge, and it might be like a half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever it is, and you're telling your whole story, after a few times, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, you're going to start realizing, okay, which parts of this story do I need to still continue to say out loud, like on the air around me? Because you're going to start listening back and be like, I needed to say that, but I don't know that that part of the story actually needs to be constantly like told out loud to other people. Or maybe it does, but in a different way. I don't know. You'll start to really hear yourself back and listen to yourself. Sometimes I think we speak because we haven't even been able to listen to ourselves. So if you can create that experience first with telling your story to yourself, then I think by the time you're telling your story to other people, you intuitively know more, okay, what do I need to bravely, courageously say? But it's not just bleh, like everything coming out. And then I think it's also, you made such an important point, which is anybody who has been through challenging, traumatic things, also abusive things, a lot of times we are giving all of ourselves before someone has earned access to that space. And I don't have a neat and clear answer for that because I think that it's going to be a little bit messy in the beginning because even if you try to have boundaries, you'll just be trying to like force protect yourself and then spill your story. And then you'll be like, oh, they still didn't deserve it. But what I would say is if you can have a moment with yourself before you're about to tell your story that asks like, is this actually a really safe space for me to tell the story? And ask it and just see what your body tells you. I work a lot with the body and I work with a lot of people who feel like, oh, I'm sure that's a great question, but I don't know the answer. And a lot of times when I invite people to say, just ask your body the question, ask your consciousness the question. Don't answer it, just ask it. You'll immediately hear yes, no, like from somewhere in the background, if you want to call it your spirit, your consciousness, your intuition, whatever it is. So when you're like, oh, I'm going to tell the story to a group of people or to someone I just met or whatever it is, a new lover or something, is this a safe space? And if your body says, yeah, even if it's scary, you'll know it's safe. And if your body says no, then just pump the brakes and you'll start to grow your trust muscle with yourself that way.
That's really interesting. I mean, I have so many things I want to say about that, but we're going to keep this on you.
I want to hear them all. Please don't forget. I want to know.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. First of all, I just want to reiterate that I think it's such a beautiful thing to tell yourself your story. I think that's such an incredible first step that I think most of us don't do.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I think I actually used to do that intuitively as a child because I'd sing to myself or I'd talk to myself in the mirror. And that would be like my way of self-soothing.
Really.
Um, and I really wanted to know more because a lot of my listeners, they love music.
Yeah.
They're music lovers.
Yeah.
It's music can be very healing for a lot of them. And so are there ways that they can use music in a specific way that you know of for their own healing?
Yeah. So music to me was my first way into healing, and it was actually just through sound and the voice. And I was actually in an acting class. I had just started teaching myself guitar, and my acting teacher was doing these vocal practices with us one day, and he would have you intone or use your voice, but then check for in your body where you were holding tension. And the whole class ended up standing around me. They'd be like, "Oh, she's holding tension in her wrist. Oh, it's in her forehead. Oh, it's in her," until they had me laying on the ground. And only the teacher, because he was such a master, he knew. He was like, "You're holding tension somewhere. I can hear it in your voice, but you're so good at hiding it." Because I'd been through so much abuse, I was performing calm. He was like, "Where is it?" And after a moment, he was like, "It's in her eyelids." And my eyelids were like lightly scanning tension back and forth. So if you are a music lover, my first thing I would say is actually like, whether if it's to yourself in the shower or in the car with all the windows down, or you love to use your voice, like actually singing from a place of, I need to allow my own voice to soothe my body, to move through my body, and to try to like relax and move my body at the same time. These are things that we underestimate. It's why I did drugs for so many years, because I just loved to go like scream in front of a speaker and dance. And my body was like, I just want you to use your voice to soothe your body and to relax yourself. But the next step forward, I would say, is in my TEDx talk, I talked about how I was given um, sound healing theta tapes in different sonic frequencies when I was healing my brain. And I thought it was so boring. I was like, listening to blah, blah, blah. And what I ended up doing was like layering a bunch of different music on top of it. And then it led me to this exercise that I now do with people, which people love, which is take a song from your childhood that you loved. Any song that you grew up with that was like a childhood anthem in some way. And if the lyrics in some way are not empowering, which a lot of our childhood anthems weren't, they're like breakup songs, they're like trauma songs, sad songs, rewrite the lyrics of the song. Same melody, but rewrite the lyrics and sing that song. Go find the karaoke version of the instrumental and re-sing it with your lyrics. I have seen so many people transformed just by being able to sing the song that was like their sad, parents broke up to the song, but I loved it, and re-singing it with lyrics that are about like believing in love, resilience, being worthy of love. We underestimate how much we are reprogramming our actual conscious and subconscious mind just by using sound, vibration, frequency, and then the power of words and directing that intention in our body. So that's what I would say to music lovers. You already love music, like let your voice be the guidance for when you need to release. Move your body when you're releasing, and then actually try rewriting a song from your past and seeing what it feels like, even if you tell yourself you're not a singer, you're not a songwriter, because it's a really empowering experience.
I love that so much. I'm going to have to try it.
It's really fun.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's a lot for the audience to digest. You've really given them a lot to take in and try out. I encourage you all to try out a lot of the things that TIHANE is teaching. And she does do this. You are a coach and you help people through this process. So if you need someone to take you on that journey, you can also check her out.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask if there is one tip to leave my audience with to help upgrade their human operating system today. what would it be?
Yes. So we've talked about it and around it a lot in this podcast, but just to simplify it, my tip is humming. There is so much incredible research about what humming does in our body. And the reason why I love humming is because there's so many secret ways that you can hum when you're in the middle of a stressful situation. A lot of times the tips we get from people are a bit impractical. They can be like, go outside and put your feet in the grass. And you're thinking, okay, but I am in the middle of a stressful situation at the DMV. So what do I do right now? So if you also feel comfortable, you can put your hand like just on your chest. It doesn't have to look like it's prayer like, but you can just put your hand somewhere. And when you inhale and then you hum out, you can just be like, you don't even have to make it some ceremonious hum, but if it's just like, oh my God, today, But if you do that a couple times, there's so much incredible science about the way that you immediately start to shift out of fight and flight. And there's this humming resonance that happens just like when we see like babies are hummed to, where your whole nervous system will just start to calibrate into a state of actual present awareness. So I would say like making contact, you can put your hand on your knee and just taking a breath. And when you hum, you think of sending that hum to wherever you've put your hand. And when you're breathing into your body like that, especially for people if you've been through trauma or if you have anxiety disorders or even ADHD or anything like that, you're ultimately taking your brain out of this multi-dimensional state of worrying about the past and the future and all these different tabs open in your brain. And you're just focusing all of your present awareness into your body right now. And just by doing that, you will open up inside of you this moment that I call the crossroads moment, where instead of immediately launching into a reaction that you regret later or doing something that's like a shutdown mechanism, you have this moment, this breath, this where you just have a crossroads of like, how do I want to respond? Instead of immediately being victim to the operating system you had, it's like you literally tap into the operating system and say, what are my options here?
Acting versus reacting.
Yeah.
And humming. I love that.
Yeah.
I have additional questions. I have so much that I want to talk to you about. Well, we'll have to have you on the show again. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your knowledge, for sharing yourself, and for just being so brave in the world. We need more people like you.
Thank you. It is always an honor to sit with you.
That was TIHANE. You can find her music, performances, and creative work on her website and on her socials at tihane.soul, which I'll link in the show notes below. Her debut album, The War on Love, is out now, and if you're anything like me, you'll love this genre-bending cinematic record. She's also the creator of Unbecoming, an immersive multimedia performance that blends autobiographical storytelling about overcoming abuse with a larger story about our collective humanity. So please go follow her, listen to the album, explore her work, and send this episode to someone who needs a reminder that healing and creativity are not separate things. And of course, if you love this episode, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the Human OS with all of your lovely friends. It genuinely helps these conversations reach more people. Thank you so much for joining me on the Human OS. I'm Story, and I'll see you in the next episode. Give me a hug. See you.